So, hi everyone, and welcome to Mental Wealth in Conversation with Shalina. For those of you who are not aware, my name is Aarti, and I am in charge of doing some of these online things with our conversations. And we're really pleased today to be joined with Shalina to talk a little bit about being unapologetically you. So, before we get into that, I just wanted to highlight a bit about mental wealth for those of you who are not aware. So, we offer a safe, supportive, and confidential space for South Asians over the age of 30 who are struggling with their mental health or want to increase their mental well-being. We do things like this, these online conversations, which a lot of our world in the last year, 18 months has gone online with different guest speakers. We do workshops, and we also have a lot of social media content across Facebook and Instagram. So if you haven't already, definitely give us a follow, give us a like, and hopefully you'll get a lot from this. So today's conversation is all about being unapologetically you, which I think is something that we all struggle with in some ways, especially when we're on a journey to being authentic. And, quite noticeably, we're two South Asian women also on this, conversation. So I think that's important to highlight that, that's also something that adds another complicated layer being a South Asian woman. So Shalene, I'm going to hand it over to you just to tell us a little bit about, who you are and what it is that you do, because there might be people listening to this and watching this that are not aware.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hi, I am Shalina Litt, and thank you so much for inviting me on a topic that really needs a lot of attention. Who I am, I guess I'm many things, as we all are. I'm a teacher by day. I'm a mom. I run my own business, supporting children with special needs. And an activist, I'd say, someone who really is public about sharing my hardships and talking about the mental abuse that maybe I endured in trying to find a little bit of salvation, light at the end of the tunnel when I hit a bumpy road or a dark time in my life. So yes, that's me.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're going to get into a little bit about that and obviously whatever detail you're comfortable to share. But that is something that is quite refreshing, I would say, about you. When I look at your content online and on social media and in your podcast, you do talk a lot about your struggles and the challenges that you've had to face and actually why it's brought you to where you are right now. And I think the first question to start us off with is just tell us about the journey to becoming unapologetically you and who you are today.
Um, I think it definitely started when I got sexually abused as a kid. And, when I came out to my family, the abuser admitted that he did it. And I think at that point, at a young age, we kind of are sold into an idea, or our fantasy is kind of smashed to smithereens. There's this idea of how people should behave and the reality of what happens. So I think not only did my trauma begin at an early stage, I think the idea of people pleasing also began then. And it put me down this path where I just lost myself immediately. And I think that's what has unfolded is I found myself in this messy arena where my thoughts were just really just made a mess. Me being Asian, me being Muslim, me being exposed to a very Black culture at the time, going to school, meeting lots of different children. My mom wanted me to be one thing, my friends wanted me to be another, and my own ideas. So I think all of those things really compressed together set you up on a path of really being content again, coming back to people behaving the way that you should have. You have to just, I think, be realistic with the expectations.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of complicated layers there that you shared that,
Yes.
from a young age that I think a lot of us, especially when you have a dual heritage, do have to face and about finding your place. But I think when you add into that trauma, that really does add another layer. And I think trauma is quite interesting, really. And it's not something we tend to address probably a lot quite head on in the South Asian community or just generally across a lot of communities. And maybe when you're younger as well, it's harder to process and understand maybe what's happened as well. But I've been reading something recently about how trauma can actually be quite a powerful transformation, or depending on how we deal with it and how we work through it, can actually provide that powerful spiritual transformation to becoming more authentically who we are. It does really define and change us to a certain extent. And would you say that that's where that's led you to be?
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think there comes a point where, from my faith, obviously everyone can see I'm a Muslim, and our faith tells us that God doesn't burden you with more than you can bear. And I think at the time, spiritually, you're kind of like, why, why me? But I think finally, once I survived all of that turmoil and whatnot, I realized when I would meet other people that I had come a long way, and I was able to then translate my hardship into being in a much powerful position. So I started to become more empowered in sharing my journey, and it turned into quite a healing. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Although I think a lot of people struggle to understand why. When you finally get older, you're like, okay, nervously, hey, bring it on. Okay, what you got?
Yeah, I guess, as you're sharing some of that, it just reminds me of how those, there's that really age-old saying, isn't there? What doesn't kill you make you stronger. And I think it really is absolutely true, because you're absolutely, and I believe the same as you, that you're not put in situations, or you're not facing hardship, unless the creator, whoever we want to, define that person as God, as the creator, or the universe, or karma, however we define it, as really knows that we can handle that, even though we might not understand that we can handle that. And it might be, like you said, a process of going through the motions as you get older, and then you've got all the defined layers, and maybe it might be something we process when we're a little bit older as well. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned faith, because I think in a lot of spaces, especially when we think about mental health, faith is, I think, underestimated a lot, about how supportive that can be as a mechanism, how safe that can feel as a mechanism in people's recovery and journey. And my faith as a South Asian woman doesn't look the same as yours, but that doesn't mean it's any less strong. It doesn't mean it hasn't pulled me through as much as what it has with you. And I think that's really interesting to mention that. And I know there'll be people watching this and listening to this that probably will resonate with the idea that faith has been the biggest driver to get them through. And would you say that's happened with yourself?
Well, I mean, from the age of 15, I was in the music business. And I've only been wearing hijab since the age of like 30. So I've been practicing technically for 12 years. Yes, I'm 42, I was doing the maths. Um, and yeah, I think it's important to understand that music has its set of own attitudes and beliefs, right? In the music that we listen to, in Beyonce, there is an empowerment in all of these artists in the music we listen to. And so I think what happened, like I said, is that all of these ideas of who I am and what makes me happy and what I connect to, and kind of became entangled. Um, and that's why I think causes the most distress, and that's why I think, as I got older, meditating and really learning to understand how to separate those ideas really gave me comfort, and strength, because then I understood how my faith and what I love to do, can marry each other and help me be, in this world.
Mm, that's interesting, because the image I had in my head where you were talking about that is almost being like having separate identities, when you were going through that, as being like, someone who was in the music, and that was the identity that was very separate to the faith. But it sounds like as you've gone through this journey, you've actually been able to merge them in a very harmonious way. And it really is a beautiful, connection of both, really, because both are a big part of you. And actually
Yeah.
being able to bring them together is important. And I know when I was younger, I really struggled with the very much the dual heritage thing, when I was a teenager and things, and, really loving some of the elements of the spiritualness and the religion that I learned. But there were things that I was also more from a desi culture perspective that I was struggled with. And then also being quite a modern feminist woman, and really trying to understand how could they merge, because technically they couldn't. To me, when I was younger, I couldn't see how they could. And I remember almost feeling like I had to make a choice. And it was hard. It's almost like you feel like you're really torn. And I know as I've got older, I've understood that 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 is what that was at the time. But at the time I didn't know that. I didn't understand that that was, you know, probably quite a common thing for a lot of individuals to get to. And you're right, like as I've got older, I definitely feel that I've been able to merge those. So I'm a woman of faith and I'm spiritual, but I'm a feminist. You know, I would say I'm an activist as well. I'm quite vocal in a lot of those things. And you know, it's important, I think, we find a world where they all fit. And I think that's one of the biggest things about being authentic. In that journey, it's about saying that this is my world and this is what fits with me. And it's taking all the different parts that work for you. And I think we struggle to do that a lot of the time.
Yeah, because let's face it, when you're a woman and you're Asian, you know, up in there, or whatever you want to call it, in what different language, you know, there's this idea of izzat, respect, you
Mm.
know, and shame on you, you know. And I think those ideals are so oppressive because realistically, our parents carry these values and then they expose us to a society that totally contradicts those values. So you go
Mm.
to school, you know, and all of your friends are like, yeah, you know, I'm going to go out later, and you know, and my dad's doing this, and what, you know, and then you're like, oh no, I'm not allowed to come out, and you know, so I just think as I got older, like for example, I remember I got close to one of my friends, and he was like, do you want to come to the church with me? And I seen a gospel choir, and I was like, oh my God, it was so powerful. And they,
Mm.
you know, and I think that really hit me. And then most of my friends were gospel singers. So we would sing about God, you know, and I was like, there's nothing like this in Islam, you know?
Mm.
And of course, that does create a lot of confusion. A lot of people see me and they're like, Shalina, you are actually blacker than you are Asian. You know, I am not that chick that you can put in a box, you know, Pakistani, but yeah, I don't have one sarong kameez in my wardrobe, you know. Um, and at first I felt compelled to do that, but now I'm like, you know what? If that's just not who I am, you know, let me just
Yeah.
borrow one of your suits when I need to go to a wedding,
Mm.
and that's it. So yeah, I just think we have to stop um, appeasing people, because that is what can really affect us. And I really think that there needs to be more awareness, not only to individuals, but parents in how to do this as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, you've been on your journey and now you're thinking about the messaging and the parenting styles that you have with your children and thinking about what messaging is then passed down. Because some of the stuff that we do is quite unconscious and we don't necessarily realize it. There's a lot of work we can do on ourselves to actively and consciously be different and maybe be quite subjective with our words and our movement and our actions. But there are things inevitably that will be passed down that we don't always see as well and are done quite unconsciously. And you know, those are moments when you like move out of your parents' house and you realize you're a lot more like them than you actually realize with the certain little things that are like pet peeves and things. And I know that when I moved out, I was like, oh my God, I'm like so much like my mom in so many ways. And you know, and that's not always a bad thing, but I think when
Yeah,
you're struggling to find your space, it's almost like it can be very confusing. Absolutely, to being that. And I really like that there's a message there for parents as well about thinking about that level of responsibility. Because when we think generationally, there are different responsibilities and roles that different generations can have. And we do want to think about how we can be better for the next generation and raise a better generation and maybe raise a more liberated and free generation as well that don't necessarily have as many struggles as we do. And we know that
yeah,
we can't always stop them from going through some of those struggles and those challenges, because I don't know about yourself, but I kind of think that a lot of the struggles and challenges that I've been through has almost pushed me into being more authentically me than I
yeah,
ever was, because it took me to really uncomfortable places within myself that I had to address, things that
yeah,
I couldn't sweep under the carpet anymore and I had to face in order to be a better version of myself. And for me, that's the definition of growth. It's painful, it's ugly, it's horrible, like yeah, it's just not very nice place to be, but actually ultimately it is really worth it. And I think if somebody's going through that right now in order to become who they are, and unapologetically who they're, like you said, you don't have ethnic clothing in your closet, and that's who you are and you're unapologetic about it, which is great.
mhm.
What advice would you give somebody who's going through that really mucky, you know, that really painful phase right now, who's watching this or listening to this?
I think I would definitely say that, you know, you have to take time out and allow your thoughts to be collected. Write them down if you have to, but you got to hit pause. You got to put the phone down and you just got to listen. Just like that voice tells you what you're going to wear today, what you're going to eat today. You got to make friends with that voice. So yeah, I would definitely say that played a big role for me in helping me understand what was grieving me.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. For me, it's really lovely to kind of be like almost like be a friend to yourself, and be kind to yourself. And I think that's something a lot of us really struggle with, kindness to self. We've had Mental Health Awareness Week this month, and we know that there's often a lot of things that we highlight about mental health. We've had a pandemic, and there's been a lot of things around that. I've had conversations with people at work or, over Teams and Zooms, and, we're coming out of this lockdown, and there's a lot of people quite worried about a lot of stuff, maybe mixing again, being in big crowds, but also internally about maybe the lack of exercise that we've had, how a body shape is probably a little bit different than it is. And, kindness to self, I think, is really, really important, but it's not always easy to do. So, what I hear in that message is, if you are struggling, just be kind to yourself and give yourself the time if you need it. Give yourself that quiet space if you need it. I love the addition of journaling. Like, I'm somebody that journals a lot and writes stuff down a lot, and I find that very, very powerful for me to be able to do that. But I do also find that's quite an internal thing to do as well. Like, it's something that's quite private and internal. So I'd always add on to that. And I'm sure you would agree with this, but just sort of to use external, people as well, if that's helplines or resources, or even just friends and family around you that you can share
Yeah,
this with as well.
definitely. Because what I was going to say is that, look, at one point you become, well, for me anyway, I was suicidal, right?
Mm.
And you have to be able to look at your conversation with yourself externally. And when you look on that piece of paper, you have to be able to look and go, okay, is this a healthy conversation I'm having with myself? Or is this toxic? More times than ever, it's a toxic conversation. And that's where having the right people to come in and change that conversation you have with yourself is so important. I was put in a position
Mm.
today when someone called me. Now, if you've seen with someone, you would not think for a hot minute that they were someone that would have these moments or these breakdowns, but they do. And it's not like they are a mentally unstable person. No, there's something called burnout. We all have it. And I think when burnout happens, it's so important that at them times you do have people you can just connect with.
Yeah, I hear that absolutely. And I think sometimes if we don't know ourselves that well, it's harder to spot the burnout, or it's harder to spot the signs of burnout that's coming. And I think in some way we've all experienced it. Like, I've been saying a lot to friends that I've met recently that, and these are friends I haven't seen since last year, because we've been in a pandemic and we've all been trying to keep safe, that we've all experienced, the pandemic, but we've all experienced it differently, and we've all had a very different. And even when you just think about the people you live with, that can be difficult as well, to just think about how we've been locked in with those people that we live with. And sometimes we get on with them, sometimes we don't, and sometimes we agree, and sometimes we don't. And, those spaces outside of here that we would have utilized, such as friends and other family members, and maybe, groups and community centers that we go to, or hobbies that we would do that we really would love to do outside, we haven't been able to do. And so, that burnout has definitely, where we've had those opportunities to release some of those emotions and those energies, we haven't always had. So I definitely hear you about burnout, and I think there's a lot of people that will probably resonate with that message here as well. I think that's really important. So you've talked about music, you've talked about faith, you've talked about meditation, you've talked about the importance of being kind to yourself throughout this journey.
Mhm.
You've also shared about, opening up and sharing your story. And I can imagine that wasn't particularly easy for you as well, and it's taken you a long time to get there. But can I ask, what does it do for you when you share your story with others, and when you are open about your experiences? What do you get from that, and what do you hope other people get from that?
So I think sharing my story with others really just helps me realize that I'm not alone, and that how I deal with something might actually be a healing for someone else. I remember going through domestic violence, going on YouTube and thinking, can I just look and find someone looking like me and understanding my issues with my faith and, my being Asian and, avoiding being divorced. I mean, let's face it, look, I've been married 4 times and I've been divorced 4 times, right? And I think everyone must be like, oh my God, you can say that? And you can say that with your
Mm.
head held high. Yeah, I can. You know why? Because each time that I recognized I was in an abusive relationship, I walked away. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I probably stayed in those relationships a little bit too long because of the people around me. Because my family were like, Shalina, it's better to be married than to be known as a divorced woman, right? Islamically, maybe I'd gone to the masjids and said, he's beating me. And maybe the imam or whoever it is that I spoke to was like, well, just hang in there a little bit longer, after
Mm.
hardship comes ease or whatever. So for me, when I look back on that, I know it didn't feel right. And I have to use that experience to speak out against that. And so, how does that feel? That feels right. And that is what helps me get out of bed every day and do these kind of conversations, because I do not want someone to go knock on the door that I knocked on and end up being in a relationship for longer than they have to. The best relationship that you can start with is yourself, because unfortunately, in the world that we live in, not everybody understands what you're going through. So
Mm.
be ready to step outside of the normal circles.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and that's a really lovely way to kind of round up some of this conversation. And there's so much that we've touched upon that, we could continue for a long time. There's loads of themes here. And I just kind of want to reiterate, if anybody's watching this or listening to this and, they're affected by any of this, please seek help and support. And we'll make sure that we will link some helplines with this as well if people need some support. And just know that if you are struggling, it's important that you do talk openly about it and you don't struggle on your own. And there is someone you can talk to, even if that is someone on a helpline. If you don't have family members or friends, there is someone on a helpline or someone on a phone line that you can speak to online. But I just wanted to end with just highlighting some of the work that you're doing, Shalina, on your YouTube content, because you mentioned about, going online and not really seeing that representation. And representation is so important in these spaces, mental
Yeah.
health, well-being, domestic abuse, whatever it is. We want to make sure that our voices are heard. And you've got a YouTube series called Let's Talk, Let's Heal. Tell us a little bit about that and some of the topics that you cover.
Yeah, so let's talk, let's heal. So far, we've done forgiveness, we've done abuse. I think just the topics that I know need to be addressed for us to get to healing. I also do something with Muslim Women's Network that's called Behind Closed Doors, again, speaking about very oppressive subjects. I'm doing a lot, in terms of making sure that there's content out there. It doesn't cost a thing, because I know that there was this point where I was literally behind closed doors, and listening or watching something like that was just emotionally traumatic for me. So for me to be able to see someone who's smiling and saying, hey, I went through it and I'm smiling, I feel good, I look good,
Yeah.
and I'm telling you, right, the moment that you decide, right, that this is not who I am, I don't like this is not who I am, it can change, right? Put it out there, because God is good. The universe, whatever you want to call it, right? Before you know it, you're just gonna be like, what? Things happen. You meet people, right? Just know everyone you meet, everything that you see, it happened for a reason, and you just got to learn to go with your gut, right? Love yourself. You know you deserve to be treated better than what you're getting treated. And often that is what really causes us so much grief.
Mhm. I like that. What you've got there is messages of hope,
Mhm.
regardless of what people are going through and how dark and dire things can feel, that, you're on the other side of that saying, I did this, I went through this, I survived, but I'm thriving. I haven't just survived, I've thrived. And there is hope on the other side. And there is hope in terms of what it can look like on the other side. It isn't an easy journey, but having people like yourself to represent that, I think, is important. So thank you, Shalina, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great to have you in conversation. Like I said, there's so much more we can unpick. So I'm sure there's going to be a time that we're going to come back to you and want to unpick a little bit more with yourself. But thank you just for being so raw and so honest with yourself. And I think in sharing how you can become unapologetically you to the people who are watching and listening to this, because, we're all on a journey. It's all very individual. We can't compare that, but we're all here to support each other. And I think that's what's important, that we're creating this space, this supportive space, saying that we see you, And we hear you and we're here.
Absolutely. And you're loved.
Yes, definitely agree with that. Thank you, Shalina.
Thank you.